Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight, our opening subject will be wartime radio propaganda from both sides, and we're going to start with Trin T. No, who died recently at the age of 85 or perhaps 87, and she was better known as Hanoi Hannah. Hanoi Hannah was the Vietnam War equivalent of either Axis Sally or Tokyo Rose. She would broadcast from Hanoi to American GIs in the mid-60s during the Vietnam War, and she would attempt to destroy their morale. She was fluent in English. She learned it from American movies like Gone with the Wind, and she was a skillful broadcaster, although most GIs claim that she didn't really change their minds. But she read American War Dead every day for 15 to 30 minutes. She played American music like Bob Dylan, and she read from American papers and magazines to give her some credence, especially when American Armed Forces Radio wasn't always telling the truth to the GIs. A lot of the GIs listened to the BBC to get their news. Here's a little bit of one of Hanoi Hannah's broadcasts.
How are you, G.I. Joe? It seems to me that most of you are poorly informed about the going of the war, to say nothing about a correct explanation of your presence over here. Nothing is more confused than to be ordered into a war to die or to be maimed for life, without the faintest idea of what's going on. Isn't it clear that the war makers are gambling with your lives while pocketing huge profits?
She claimed she wasn't a communist, just a skilled propagandist, and she and her husband moved to the South after the North Vietnamese took over the whole country. Here she is in an interview a couple of years back.
Did you have to believe in what you were reading to the GIs? Did you write it yourself?
Yes, I took part in the translation, also doing some of the writings, yes. Of course, we must believe in something.
What did you, at that time, remember believing strongly in? What did you want to happen?
Really speaking, I don't want there is war between the Vietnamese people and the Americans who are sent here to fight the war. So we think it's not right. So I just want the GIs to resist this fighting, that they don't take part in the fighting. Of course, it's difficult for them because they are sent by the government, but our work is to make them believe that the war they are fighting is not just. It's against the Vietnamese people. The Vietnamese people want their country to be free, so they should not be here, the American GIs.
I don't know how free those Vietnamese people were. There were hundreds of thousands of boat people and re-education camps for those free people. And one of the interesting things is Hanoi Hannah didn't like to talk about her son, who emigrated to the United States to become an artist, and she refused to explain what happened. So much for fighting for freedom, huh? Hanoi Hannah, propagandist till the end. Well, we move on to one of our propagandists now, Phyllis Creore, who died recently at the age of 100. She was one of the most prominent Canteen Girls in World War II. She broadcast on NBC out of New York City from 1942 to 1945 to servicemen going overseas, and by shortwave to those servicemen who were already overseas. She broadcast for 15 minutes every Friday. She'd take requests, she'd read letters, she'd sing songs, and she was actually part of a canteen show that was staged in New York City, and it served as a morale boost for American soldiers. Here's a New York Historical Society report on Phyllis Jean, as she was known.
Here is your Canteen Girl, Phyllis Jean.
I wish you luck in everything you do, that all your cares will disappear from view.
While I was working in a stage door canteen, I decided that it would be fun to have a canteen on the air, that I could sing popular songs to servicemen and their sweethearts, their mothers, and sisters, and families, and maybe help them to feel a little closer together.
I wish you'd all come into the canteen right now. And that part of my wish doesn't need music to go with it. It's a simple, direct welcome to men in the armed services everywhere, to their folks and loved ones everywhere. From your Canteen Girl, Phyllis Jean.
Then I'd chat to servicemen, and pretty soon fan mail began to come.
Lieutenant Delano of Fort Monmouth was kind enough to write me a lovely letter.
Dear Miss Canteen Girl, I didn't quite catch the name over the radio, so rather than make a mistake, I'll call you the Canteen Girl. I just finished listening to your program, and I want to say that I enjoyed it very much.
I like people who take the trouble to write letters, and it's especially appreciated around this busy Christmas time. So, Lieutenant, a song for you.
So I was able to talk to individual boys and sing their requests.
Just another day and we'll be parted. I can almost feel your goodbye kiss.
As the fans began, it became very vivid to me. It seemed to mean something and was very special. I wish you luck in everything you do, that all your cares will disappear from view.
Sweet dreams until tomorrow's reveille. This is my wish. Be sure to drop in at the canteen next Friday at the same time, won't you? Just set your dial right where it is now and wait for the announcer to say,
Here's your Canteen Girl, Phyllis Jean.
good luck and good night.
Canteen Girl came to you from New York.
Canteen Girl, a far cry from Hanoi Hannah. Well, we're going to move on to our feature tonight, Sir Neville Marriner, who died recently at the age of 92. He was one of the great conductors of the 20th century, and he founded the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields in London. Here's Matthew Bannister of the BBC4 Last Word on Sir Neville Marriner.
Sir Neville Marriner was the conductor who founded the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields and led them to become the world's most recorded orchestra. Much in demand by other international orchestras too, Sir Neville made more than 600 recordings of 2,000 musical works. Only Herbert von Karajan recorded more. Sir Neville Marriner was born in Lincoln and introduced to music at an early age.
My father was my teacher, and he was a builder who should have been a musician. As soon as he arrived home, he sat down at the piano and started doing something musically.
But the piano wasn't Neville's main instrument. He took up the violin, and as the broadcaster and writer Norman Lebrecht recalls, made his mark as a teenager.
In August 1939, he finds himself 15 years old, summoned into the front desk of the London Symphony Orchestra because all the men are being called up to war. And there he is, playing with Henry Wood at the BBC Proms.
It was rather alarming, of course, because promenade concerts lasted for about 4 hours in those days, and we had 1 3-hour rehearsal. So Sir Henry would say, well, gentlemen, you know, this is the tempo of this movement. And then he would say to Solomon, who was probably the solo pianist, solo, you don't have to play it all, just show us how the cadenza ends. So there were some frightening evenings with Henry Wood conducting at the Proms.
He gets called up. And this is the somewhat mysterious bit, because the story that's known is that he gets invalided out. The question was what landed him in hospital, and he was always very vague about it. And then one evening, I'd gone to see him after work, and was sitting in his flat in Kensington, and the sun was subsiding at about the same level as the wine in the bottle. And I said, Neville, what happened during the war? And he said, I was with the SBS, Special Boats Squadron. We were sent out on recce's to the Normandy beaches before D-Day, and on one occasion we got spotted by the Germans, and they opened up at us with big guns and small guns and everything, and I got hit a few times and fell into the water. And he was just a total hero, because you didn't get into SBS without volunteering. And as we're talking, in pitch darkness, I look around and I see his wife Molly at the door, and she's signalling to me, carry on, because she hadn't heard this before. Neville was too modest to tell his own family.
So how did the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields come about?
It came about because Neville was a bit of a rebel.
There is a great deal of pleasure in playing symphonic music, of course, but that you do lose your identity slightly in a symphony orchestra, and several of the younger ones of us that had joined at the same time decided that we'd like to have a smaller group where our own personal contribution was more obvious.
One of them was the organist at St. Martin in the Fields, who said, well, why don't you give a concert in my church? And that's really how it began, and they were heard by an Australian millionaire heiress who said, come and record for my label. But they don't really take off until about 1958 or 59, when they recorded the Four Seasons at Abbey Road. They had a really bad morning at Abbey Road. This is how Neville told it to me. Came lunchtime, everybody went out to get a bite to eat. They came back. Some of them were slightly the worse for wear, especially the first violinist and soloist, Anna Loveday. And Neville taps his stand, and they go straight into Four Seasons. And Loveday plays an absolute blinder. They play through the whole thing, one take. And it is a sensational hit. It sells something like 500,000 records. It gets the Academy known all over the world. You know, they got invitations from South America and goodness knows where.
And what was his style on the rostrum?
Restrained.
Was it flamboyant?
No. He was restrained. He was the least flamboyant of men, although he had a smile that could light up the biggest of halls.
He's a real pro, you know.
The cellist Stephen Isserlis.
And he just got on with it. As with his personality off stage, he was just the opposite of pompous. He would just get it right, he would do it, and there was no fuss, no ego, no posturing. I just remember I probably talked much too much, as I tend to do in rehearsals. At one point I could tell he was getting a bit testy, so I shut up, and that was probably very good for me.
He never accepted any subsidy. This was run as his own business, wasn't it? I mean, did he have great financial acumen as well as creative acumen?
He was shrewd rather than strategic. He hated the idea of subsidy. He said, you can't let the bureaucrats interfere with your artistic life. If we can keep this pure and we don't take a penny from them, then we do exactly what we believe in and exactly what we like. He made good money along the way because he was artistic advisor to Amadeus, the film.
So rose the dreadful ghost from his next and blackest opera.
When Amadeus was staged at the National Theatre, the music advisor and, in fact, arranger was Harrison Birtwistle, who's an out-and-out modernist. So when Hollywood came in and Milos Forman directed it, they wanted something safer and more middle of the road, and they wanted somebody who knew Mozart inside out, and Neville was just self-recommending. So he was music advisor on the film, and he conducted the soundtrack, which sold in very substantial quantities.
He got the best out of his musicians because they wanted to play for him, which is a great thing in a conductor. I mean, I always think of that line of Falstaff where he says he's not merely wit himself, he causes wit in other men. He's left an enormous legacy of recorded music. He popularised a lot of classical and baroque music that really found its way into people's hearts because of him. He's left this fantastic orchestra, the Academy of St Martin's in the Fields. I think that's a hell of a legacy, actually.
The Academy of St Martin in the Fields, conducted by Sir Neville Marriner.
Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. We're going to close tonight with Rod Temperton, who died recently at the age of either 66 or 68. He was a British dude who was a keyboardist and songwriter. He joined a German disco group called Heatwave. In 1977, he wrote this song. Well, that song caught the ear of Quincy Jones, who we talk a lot about on this show. So Quincy Jones asked Rod Temperton to write for Michael Jackson, and that he did. He wrote a bunch of songs for Michael Jackson, including Rock With Me, but his opus magnum was this.
It's supposed to be right. Something evil's working in the door. Under the moonlight, you see a sight that almost stops your heart. You try to scream, but terror takes the song before you make it. And you start to breathe. And so it looks you right between the eyes. You're paralyzed. Because this is
Yeah, Thriller. How'd you like to have that one in your portfolio? Quincy Jones' wife at the time was Peggy Lipton, and she knew Vincent Price.
I'd always envisioned this kind of talking section at the end. One thing I'd thought about was to have a famous voice in the horror genre to do this vocal. And so Quincy said to me, how about if we got Vincent Price? And I said, well, that'd be amazing.